Good morning, students. Welcome to your English literature class. Today we are going to continue the chapter number 9, The Sound Machine, written by Roald Dahl. The objectives of this session are: by the end of this video, you will be able to know the meanings of the difficult words, the character sketch of the protagonist of the story, Closeness, and how Closeness is different from the other two characters of the story. And who are the two other characters of the story? Dr. Scott and Mrs. Saunders. So students, open your workbook on ICSE at page number 157. Today we are going to discuss the character sketch of Closeness, who is the protagonist or main character of the story, The Sound Machine. So, he was an amateur scientist who was obsessed with sounds. He invented a sound machine to capture the sounds which are inaudible to the human ear. So, actually Closeness, we have already read now in the story that he was an unprofessional scientist who was very much obsessed with sounds. So, he invented a sound machine which could capture those sounds which are not audible to the human ear. Now, what are his physical attributes? Closeness is described as a frail, nervous and anxious man whose hands were always moving. So, here in this paragraph, we are going to talk about his physical appearance. He had a large head that inclined towards his left shoulder as if his neck could not support it. His face was smooth and pale, almost white. He had pale grey eyes which had the look of bewilderment and remoteness. So here note down the meanings of the difficult words. First is frail. Meaning is weak. Next, inclined. Meaning is bent. Next is bewilderment. Meaning is confusion. Next is remoteness. And its meaning is seclusion or loneliness. So here children, actually Closeness is described as a very weak and eager man. His hands were always moving because he always remains nervous. He had a large head but always bent towards his left shoulder, and his face was pale, almost white. And he had pale grey eyes which had the look of total confusion and loneliness. Next point is obsessed. Closeness was a crazy, dreamy and distracted person. He was obsessed with sounds. As he himself said, "I like sound." He wanted to hear those high-pitched, inaudible sounds which, according to him, made such a powerful music that they could drive a listener mad. That is why he invented a sound machine to capture those inaudible sounds. So here, children, crazy means mad and dreamy means lost in thought. So you can say Closeness was some sort of mad person who was always lost in his own thoughts. He was totally a distracted person. He was very much obsessed with the sounds, especially those sounds which were not audible to the human ear. And he himself said, "I like sounds." Right? And according to him, he wanted to hear those high-pitched sounds which could drive a listener mad. So this was the reason he invented a sound machine to register those sounds which were not audible to human ear. His obsession was so strong that he worked for hours on it, recording the sounds made by a fly and a bat, and made changes for improving it. So, his obsession with the sounds was so intense, was so powerful or strong, that he spent many hours working or recording the sounds which were made by even a fly and a bat. Next, he has been described in the story as moth of a man, indicating that as a moth is attracted to bright lights, so was Klosner attracted to sounds. Even his neighbor, Mrs. Saunders, considered Klosner as a peculiar person, a crazy man, but a harmless one. So, children, meaning of moth. Actually, moth is a nocturnal insect, and it is said that this is an insect which is attracted to bright lights, especially in the evening. Next word is peculiar. Its meaning is strange. So here students, Klosner has been described as moth of a man. As a moth is attracted to bright lights. In the same way, Klosner was attracted to sounds, especially inaudible sounds. Those are not audible to human ear. Even when his neighbor, Mrs. Saunders, saw him, she also considered him as a strange person, a madman, but a harmless one. Next, his concentration in his work was intense. He desperately wanted to test his machine and prove his theory. At the end of the story, even after his machine was destroyed, he demanded to know from the doctor if the latter had heard the sound which he himself had heard earlier. So his concentration in his work was very strong. So to prove the theory or to test his machine, he went to the park, and even at the end of the story, when his machine was destroyed, he wanted to know from Dr. Scott whether he had heard the sound which he himself had heard earlier. Next point is insecure and lacking in confidence. Klosner's insecurity and lack of confidence is visible throughout the story in his behavior and actions. So, his insecurity and his lack of confidence can be seen throughout the story in his behavior and actions. So, while working on his machine, he would pull the wires, turn them nervously, nod his head, and twist his mouth into curious shapes. So it can be seen that when he was working on his machine, he would pull the wires, turn them nervously, nod his head, and twist his mouth into curious shapes. So here students, Klosner's nervousness shows that he lacked confidence. Even his doctor and friend, Dr. Scott, found him to be nervous and insecure and felt the tension in the room where he used to work. Even when Dr. Scott, who was his very close friend and his physician or his family doctor, he also found him to be very nervous, insecure, and when he entered his workplace, he also felt a great tension in the room where Klosner used to work. While working inside his room, Klosner was wearing a hat, and when Dr. Scott told him about it, he anxiously inquired, "Oh, have I?" Even now here students, when Klosner was working, then while working in his room, at that time he was also wearing a hat. And then Dr. Scott observed it and told him. So he very anxiously inquired, "Oh, have I worn the hat?" Similarly, when Klosner was telling him about his machine to Dr. Scott, he was shifting from one foot to the other and pulling the lobe of his ear, reflecting his insecurity and lack of confidence. So, it is also proved that he is very insecure person when Klausner was telling about his machine to Dr. Scott. Right? He was shifting from his one foot to the other, and sometimes he was pulling the lobe of his ear, and this reflects Klausner's insecurity and lack of confidence. So next is, after hearing the painful shriek of the roses, Klausner tried his experiment with daisies. So actually when he heard the painful shriek of the roses, which were cut by his neighbor Mrs. Saunders, he again wanted to try his experiment. Then this time he tried his experiment with daisies. This time what happened? He heard the cry but was not sure that it expressed pain. He then jumped to the conclusion that he was wrong in calling the shriek made by roses as a cry of pain. This shows Klausner's lack of confidence in himself and his research. So what happened? He wanted to be very sure whether he had heard some sort of pain. So he heard the cry when he did his experiment with the daisies. But he was not sure this time that it expressed pain. So he was wrong in calling it shriek, which was made by roses as a cry of pain. So this also shows Klausner's lack of confidence and in himself and his research. Now next point is meticulous and patient. Students, here meticulous means careful. Though Klausner appeared to be nervous and excited, yet he was quite meticulous and patient, like a true scientist. Means he was very patient and meticulous person. At the beginning of the story, when he entered his workplace, he picked up a piece of paper lying beside his sound machine and studied it carefully before starting his work. So, at the beginning of the story only, it is proved that he was a patient man, as when he entered his workplace, he picked up a piece of paper which was lying by the side of his sound machine, and he studied it very carefully before starting his work. It seems that he used to note down points related to his search on sounds and would refer to them when required. So it seems that he used to note down the points related to his research on sounds that he was doing, and he would refer to those points, those sounds, whenever those will be required. So now next, further, he would check each and every wire and battery and would continue to do so even for an hour, showing his patience. So this also shows that he was quite patient man, because he would check each and every wire and battery, and then he would continue to do his work even for hours. Similarly, when he wanted to call Dr. Scott to verify the result produced by his sound machine, he consulted his diary, dialed his number, and waited patiently for him to answer. Even when he called Dr. Scott so that he could verify the result which was produced by his sound machine. So at that time also he consulted his diary and dialed his number and waited patiently for him to answer or to get the result. He even sat down beside the telephone and waited for Dr. Scott to come, and at that time even he sat down by the side of the telephone and waited for Dr. Scott to come, and he could discuss the effectiveness of his sound machine. Next, lover of nature. So throughout the story, Klausner appears to be a lover of nature. He had a garden at the back of his house through which he had to pass to enter his workplace. So he is also a great lover of nature, because he had a vast garden at the back of his house, and through which he had to pass to enter his workplace. Like a moth which is attracted to bright light, Klausner was attracted to various sounds in nature. We have already discussed, students, moth is a nocturnal insect. as it is said that this insect is always attracted to bright light. Similarly, Klausner was attracted to various sounds in nature. He believed those high pitched, inaudible sounds would be making new exciting music in the universe. According to him, means he believed that the high pitched sounds which are not audible to the human ears would be making new exciting music in the universe. Such inaudible sounds, if heard by men, would make them mad with excitement. So, if these inaudible sounds could be heard by men, these sounds would make a person mad with excitement. He wanted to capture all the sounds made by plants, animals, and insects which are inaudible to human ear. So, Klausner wanted to register all the sounds made by plants, animals, insects which are not audible to human ear. That's why he invented a sound machine and put it to test on plants. For this is the reason he invented a sound machine and wanted to prove his theory, or he wanted to put it to test on plants. Next is, when his neighbor Mrs. Saunders cut the stem of the rose plants, Klausner could hear the shrieking voice as if the rose stem was in pain. So this is the reason when his neighbor Mrs. Saunders cut the stem of the rose plants, he could hear the shrieking sound as if the rose stem was crying in pain. He told Mrs. Saunders that she had, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. So he even told Mrs. Saunders that the moment she cut the rose stem with sharp pair of scissors, the rose screams in pain terribly. Klausner was deeply at pain to think about what would happen to plants, vegetation and trees when they are cut. So here Klausner was very deeply at pain to think. Means he thinks that what would happen if these plants, vegetation and trees are cut. Next is, after experimenting on a tree in a park, when Klausner called for Dr. Scott and was waiting for his arrival, he could only recall that the sound given out by the tree was frightful. So, to prove the effectiveness of the machine, when Klausner took his sound machine in a park and conducted his experiment there, and when he was waiting for doctor's arrival, he could only recall that the sound given out by the tree was very frightful. It made him feel sick with horror. He wondered what kind of a frightening sound would be made when 500 stems of wheat would be cut by a mower simultaneously. So he wondered, and he thinks that what would happen if 500 stems of wheat could be cut by a machine which is used for cutting grass simultaneously. So here mower means a machine used for cutting grass. Now what happened next? He felt if he would hear such a screaming sound, he would not be able to eat bread anymore. So here he says that if he feels all these screaming sounds, then he will not be able to eat bread anymore. He then imagined the pain which vegetables like potatoes, cabbage, carrot and onions had to undergo when they are cut from their roots. Now here he also imagines the pain which vegetables like potatoes, cabbage, carrot and onions had to undergo when they are also cut from their roots. It shows that Klausner was a sensitive man who loved nature and could feel the pain of the plants. So all these things show that Klausner was a lover of nature and a very sensitive man. Similarly, at the end of the story, when Klausner hit the trunk of the tree with axe, he was horrified and looked at the place where the blade of axe had sunk into the flesh of the tree. So, what happened at the end of the story? when Klausner hit the trunk of the tree with X. He was horrified and again looked at the place where he had hit the tree. He tried to press the edges of gash to close the wound and asked for forgiveness, saying, I'm sorry, but it will heal. It will heal me. So after realizing that he had caused a great pain to the tree, he tried to press the edges of gash to close the wound and even asked for forgiveness. And he said that he is very sorry, but it would heal. When he hit the trunk of the tree with an axe for the second time, he was more concerned about the injury he had inflicted on the tree rather than the loss of his sound machine. Here, students, inflicted means caused something unpleasant or harm. So, what happened the second time when he hit the trunk of the tree with an axe? He was very much concerned about the injury that he caused on the tree. So, students, today we have discussed the character sketch of Klausner, who is the protagonist of the story, The Sound Machine. Now, with this, the homework for the day is you have to do long question 1B on workbook on echoes. How was the protagonist of the short story The Sound Machine different from the other two characters and the general public at large? Give reasons to support your answer. Thank you.